While artists such as Siouxsie and Neu were establishing their reputation as key figures in the German movement, Kraftwerk laid low during 1972, performing few concert dates and working further on developing their studio. Their first two albums were repackaged as a double LP in the UK, but the release did little to spread awareness of the duo outside of their homeland. After performing their first concerts outside of Germany in early 1973, two French shows which were very favorably reviewed by the local press, they once again enlisted Conny Plank to engineer the sessions for their next album, Ralph und Florian. Released at the end of the year, it was a notable progression from their previous two records.
Ralph and Florian is, I think, is the breakthrough album for Kraftwerk. It's a 1973 album. It's extremely melodic, it's extremely constant, it has wonderful tracks on it. Some of the tracks could be like, you know, electronic classical music. There's a track called Dance Music, which if you put it on now, it sounds like it was made yesterday. There's a thickness to the percussion sound, which gives it that depth, that real depth. And there's a crystal clarity to the keyboard sounds and the flute sounds. But also this strong, wistful romanticism is coming in. The kind of Mahlerian, Wagnerian thing is coming in. And they're bringing that into the music. And there's this kind of strange kind of nostalgia even. I think Eno called it a strange nostalgia for the future. And like there's a strange nostalgia in that for a future, but also that reflects the past. And then there's the humor, of course, calling something a pineapple symphony, you know. I think as an album, it's a wonderful album. Also, it's a very ambient album in parts. Some of us are very quiet. And none of it has any noise or loudness to it. And there's no like screaming rock guitars on it. But there's elements of psychedelia there. There's treated guitars, but there isn't like, it is a wonderful record. It's a beautiful record, actually.
I do like Ralph and Florian. Eleanor Symphony in particular is a track which could have easily been made in the last 10 years. And you listen to something that could have been made by something like The Orb or whatever, something like that. It's quite astonishingly ahead of its time, and it's exploring quite a lot of ideas which in fact Kraftwerk themselves eventually dispensed with. But again, it has this kind of, there's things like this sort of Hawaiian guitars and like waves gently crashing against the sea. And I mean, I suppose what they're doing there is they're establishing this aspect of serenity, which I think is key to Kraftwerk, but they're using a kind of slightly different way later on. But it's actually just it isn't just a kind of stepping stone on the way to Autobahn and Man Machine. It is a wonderfully listenable album in its own right.
As well as introducing more serene elements into the album's musical content, with Ralph und Florian, Kraftwerk began to assume a very particular visual identity. In 1973, Schneider and Hutter had met violinist and artist Emil Schult. Initially simply a musical collaborator, Schult's extensive studies in the arts at Düsseldorf Academy would lead him to become a pivotal background figure in the overall Kraftwerk setup. The album not only included a bizarre comic book conceived and illustrated by Schult, but he also played a key part in the overall cover design, in which the names Ralph and Florian were written in a distinctively German typeface, and which featured a photo of the pair looking less like rock musicians and more like scientists. Here, Ralph and Florian were not only the musicians, but also the very abstracted subject of the record, and this development of a unique and clearly German visual identity would play a vital role in the future of the band.
The idea they had of themselves was much more of being kind of an artist in the sense, a type of artist that emerged in the visual art world at that time, after Warhol and Gilbert and George, who were also very important, I think, for for Kraftwerk. This kind of artist that was not longer just working in one field or around one problem or one question, but tried to produce an entire artificial character that would be changeable between different worlds, that could be used on a record cover as well as on a as in an exhibition place or on a stage. This kind of mobility of an image is something that comes from pop music, and it's something that has been adopted by the visual arts in a more professional and or in a more conceptual way in the 60s. And I think that was something that Kraftwerk adopted. That was one thing. I think one thing was the camp aspect, that we are not saying explicitly what we want, but we are leaving it up to you, and we give you all kind of material to project on. The second was this idea of an artist that they had basically taken from the visual arts. And the third thing was that they at one point discovered this idea of Germanness as some kind of artificial idea that was not connected to some kind of German nationalism or ideas of Germanness that existed historically and that are all being tainted, of course, by National Socialism or by the Nazis. So it was something new, and I think these three ideas came together, and that made this uniqueness. Because all the subjects after Ralph and Florian were somehow coded as German.
While Ralph and Florian were busy developing their own unique brand in Düsseldorf, 1973 was a breakthrough year for many of the German bands. In England, Richard Branson's Virgin Records, a newly established independent label, was on the lookout for new signings after the worldwide success of Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, their first release. Virgin had originally been a small record shop specializing in prog rock and imports from the German scene, and Branson decided to bring some of the more prominent artists to a UK audience.
The first thing where we, let's say, made some money, which was nearly nothing, was in France over a couple of years, and then Richard Branson liked it. This kind of German music he liked. He signed Ken, he signed Faust, he signed Tangerine Dream, Usher Temple, myself, and so. And through that, I think through Virgin Records in the beginning, this kind of music was really successful. I don't know, he must have a special feeling for or maybe he just said it's such a freaky music, nobody would dare to do such shit or something. I don't know what he was thinking at this time. The only thing which I know is that definitely he never listened to the music.
By far, the most noteworthy of his signings was Tangerine Dream. With the release of their 1973 LP, Atom, they had already gained essential publicity in the UK when the record was championed by pioneering DJ John Peel, who went on to name it his album of the year. In their native Germany and in France, Froze's group had been both commercially and critically successful, and their signing to Virgin propelled them onto the global stage. Their debut Virgin release, Phaedra, hit the UK top 20 in 1974 and achieved six-figure sales. It also departed from the more experimental sound of their previous records and introduced what would become their trademark sequencer-driven soundscapes.
Edgar Froese did approach Branson, and he had a very good deal for Branson. He said, "But we make a lot of music, so you can put out music by Tangerine Dream and music by us as solo musicians as well. You can put out 2 or 3 albums a year, and we can give you this for very little money as long as you get the Mogs over and you help us with the." And they were getting a lot of demand for performance. They had a massive reputation as a great live act, and that live they were awesome. And they built a great reputation from touring endlessly in Germany. I think probably those kind of things would have interested. Perhaps he would have seen the figures, seen the amount of people. So obviously there's an audience here, and he wasn't wrong. I mean, because their albums were massive hits in the UK. The thing about Tangerine Dream, unlike other German bands, was that when you heard the records, you did not feel that human beings were playing them. You didn't feel that these records were being kind of pushed forward by human beings. It was as if the actual instruments had a life of their own. the instruments were actually playing themselves. And they were making all these incredible sounds. And they were very good at texture, Tangerine Dream. Everything seemed to meld into each other. And it also had a very strong rhythmic content. And it was different. It didn't have the random sounds of a lot of the experimental music. And it didn't have the kind of noise side of, say, Noi or those bands, or even Kraftwerk. It was very melodic and very, very consonant, very complete. But it was as if the instrument was playing itself, and you had these wonderful bubbling sequences, bubbling music coming over. And of course, you know, Richard Branson sees it and said, bring them over to England and they can record it here. And it was a huge hit, and it was enormously influential. I don't think Tangerine Dream, because they took their name from a Beatles song, they were, I think Siouxsie in the Sky with Diamond, I think they, in a lot of ways, they weren't actually even seen as a German band. And when they'd play, of course, you couldn't see them. You didn't know what they looked like. There was no pictures on the album. It was just like psychedelic-looking covers, or a blue cover with something melting in it. And when you went to a Tangerine Dream concert, all you got was like these banks of flickering lights, and there was three people, in front of them with their backs to the audience playing them, but you never saw their faces. You didn't care about it, because the music was just pouring out, and it was very, very influential.
Phaedra was the first record that they released on Virgin, and in a way Phaedra is the last great Tangerine Dream record. It's kind of boring in a way, what he did after Phaedra. He just made the whole thing kind of sound like hard work, really. But I think he was more and more interested in the commercial aspects of his sound than experimentation anymore. I think he was interested in perfection and cleaning it up to the point where all the guts had been washed out of it.
Tangerine Dream, their kind of inception in the early stages, were really a genuine, very interesting proposition, and the music has this kind of very rich, very sort of roiling quality. You never know quite what it's going to become, what it's in the process of becoming, where they might take it. In the end, I find Tangerine Dream in a kind of mid-period rather disappointing. You go back and listen to some of those albums, and while they might well have seemed like tremendously impressive at times, especially with the latest stereophonic equipment or whatever, they really don't sound all that hot. I mean, they remind you of like, I don't know, the sort of soundtrack, TV soundtrack music we get to kind of horses, helicopter shots of horses running along near cliff edges and things like that. They're kind of scampering sequences sort of quality. I always think it's a tremendous shame, and I think they are one of the examples of like Krautrock's kind of sort of curiosity, its sonic curiosity, its embracing of like electronics, synthesizers or whatever, being taken up a rather sort of disappointingly orthodox and functional path, which is mostly, you know, a kind of mock grandiose sort of quality, or simply music that's just good soundtrack music.
While Tangerine Dream were busy making their presence felt in the UK, Kraftwerk were preparing to make their own impression on the international market. Having pared down their operations for the past two albums, Ralph and Florian decided to introduce new musicians to the mix when they began recording at their studios in the summer of 1974. They drafted in percussionist Wolfgang Flür and multi-instrumentalist Klaus Roeder to add new elements to the Kraftwerk sound.
Ich kam 1974 zu Kraftwerk und zusammen mit Wolfgang Flür, und die beiden, also Ralf und Florian, bestimmten eigentlich, was gemacht wird. Wir wussten oft gar nicht, was dran ist, der Wolfgang auch nicht. Kraftwerk ist Ralf und Florian. Das andere war immer nur zusätzlich. Sie haben dann Leute fast wie bezahlte Musiker eingestellt. Das haben diese Musiker auch nicht immer so gut gefunden. Aber also ich persönlich fand das so okay, weil ich mich auch so gesehen habe. Ich habe mir gesagt, okay, ich spiele mit denen mit und alles, die bestimmen, was gemacht wird, das ist okay.
Hutter and Schneider's studio in Düsseldorf, now named Klingklang, was the locus of Kraftwerk's operations, and since its inception, the pair had been continually developing it, adding new instruments and designing new equipment that would help them realize their sound.